our inquiry session. This is day 2 of an inquiry session concerning peatland impact, and it is in relation to the application by Dell Wind Farm Limited for consent for a 9-turbine development under Section 36 of the Electricity Act. If you're joining us on the webcast today for the first time and you missed yesterday, I would simply refer you back to all my preliminary comments yesterday, and I won't go through them again today, and that will allow us to continue with the evidence. Today we are to hear the evidence of Nature Scott and its witness. Yesterday it was the turn of the applicant, and we heard from 2 witnesses from the applicant. Before handing over to Mr. Ferguson for Nature Scott, I'm working on the assumption that there are no initial or procedural points that any of the parties would like to make this morning. That's helpful. Mr. Ferguson.
Good morning, Ms. Renzel. I only have a few questions in evidence in chief. As we discussed yesterday, precognitions are taken as read. Can I start by asking you to comment briefly, please, on the importance of high altitude bog with indicators of near naturalness?
Yes, morning. I'll start with blanket bog and then kind of move on from there. There's a lot of information in my inquiry report, which is 9036, about the importance of peatlands in general, so I won't cover that again here. But what I will add to that is that blanket bog only exists in specific locations, and in effect it can't be created. These specific locations are determined by weather, climate, and also having an impermeable layer underneath so they can become waterlogged. So with that in mind, we also have high altitude bog, and we would class that as peatland above 600 metres, just for ease of giving a measure for where that could be. Now these areas are especially sensitive because they are at more extreme conditions. They have greater levels of weather. They also have longer periods of snow, and that persists for longer, so you get more freeze-thaw action going on in these areas. So with that, with the longer winters in effect that they have, the plant species that are there take longer to grow. They don't have as much time as lower altitude bogs to photosynthesize and in effect create peat. So with all of these things, they are slower in forming and they are more exposed to impacts. Therefore, they are more sensitive than others. But with that in mind, we have looked at whether peatlands are, can we differentiate between different ones? And so we do look at whether or not they contain features of near natural condition, and that is important because you don't see them everywhere, and their presence indicates that that peatland has been there for a significant amount of time for them to be present, and also that the conditions are such that they still persist, and therefore they have a higher value than peatlands that don't have them. So again, they are then also very sensitive to impacts, because some of these features don't persist where there are land management actions that have allowed them to be lost.
Is it fair to say that altitude is one factor but not the only factor when you refer to the relative sensitivity of high altitude? Is that assuming all other factors are the same?
So altitude is a point, but it's a kind of a proxy for exposure, I guess. So that is, it's these areas that are more on an extreme. So you can have peatlands that are lower than that can also have characteristics that you would associate with high altitude, and that could be places in the north and west where even at sea level you can have some of these impacts with low, long-lying snow and high wind speed, and the impacts of salt and all of that can add to the vulnerability of the habitat. But for this purpose, and to give an indication for people to kind of work to, that we use the altitude as an example, but that doesn't mean to say that we wouldn't take into account these other areas that could be with a similar exposure at lower altitudes.
And with 600 metres as an indicator, there would then be a site-specific assessment through firstly the applicant's ECIA and then Nature Scott's appraisal of the overall developments, including the ECIA. Is that correct?
It is, yeah.
Okay, thank you. There was a lot of discussion yesterday regarding the level of importance of blanket bog for the purposes of the ECIA process. In your view, what level of importance should blanket bog be given in an ECIA process?
So for this, I would take a steer from the same guidance, which is 4007. And some of the paragraphs that were referred to yesterday, for example, 4.16, which in my opinion clearly would set as a minimum that blanket bog should at least be national, because it's listed on the Scottish Biodiversity List, which is a national list. But it also, at the very beginning of that paragraph 4.16, talks about the habitat types. I'll read directly from it, I won't do this very often, but habitat types of European, in brackets, international conservation importance are listed on Annex 1 of the Habitats Directive. And to me, that is quite clear, and the fact that habitats protected at the national level should be considered. So I would, as a minimum, have it at national. The following paragraph is also quite useful, as in putting some of these things in context. So 4.17, about it's essential not to underestimate the importance of habitats in suboptimal condition, which should, you know, add to some of the information that's there, but that could also be taken into account at the later part of the ECIA assessment.
So if the importance of blanket bog were to be increased to national or international, would that have the potential to change the conclusions of an ECIA assessment? I'm not asking you at this stage to give your conclusions. Just as a general question, would uprating the level of importance have the potential to change the conclusions?
In my opinion, yes, it would, because part of that is identifying the sensitivity of the habitat as well, so that would put it at that greater level. So yes, it could.
And looking at the methodology used in the ECIA, if the importance were to be increased to national or international, is it obvious to you, is there an obvious way to work through the various steps of the ECIA process, which we discussed yesterday, which the reporter or others could use to work through the process and arrive at their own conclusions? Is there I appreciate it's not a formula, it's not a matrix, but it's not an A plus B equals C. But was it, in fact, I'll ask a separate question. Was it obvious to you when you read the ECIA how the author of that report reached their conclusions?
No, it was missing parts of information that I would have expected to have seen. And
therefore, is it obvious to you how someone else might be able to work through? In fact, I'll stick with your opinion. if you were to redo using the same methodology, all other inputs being the same, could you reach a conclusion? Whether that conclusion is the same or different, could you reach a conclusion?
No, I don't find elements of it clear, so I wouldn't be able to do that. There is some information at the beginning which looks at the identification of the features. After that point, I think there's elements that are unclear, and therefore I wouldn't be able to work that back.
Thank you. Now, I want to turn to the question of vegetation and NVC classifications, and if I'm not proposing to look at the detail, but if we look at Dr. Massey's vegetation assessment and your inquiry report, there are some differences in relation to NVC classifications and the species present. Now, Nature Scott's consultation response didn't specifically mention these differences. However, clearly these issues have been developed in your inquiry report. Can you explain how these differences in NVC, how they became so prominent for the purposes of your inquiry report?
Yeah, yes, I can. I'll take a small step backwards before I do. So the MVC survey was in the ecology section, which is chapter 6, 111. Dr. Massey's report was the VAR information, which I can get you the number for if you need it. And that didn't go into the MVC communities, but did identify some of the species present. So that's where the information is held on that. And your question is, why is it so prominent in my inquiry report? Is that correct?
I may have misspoke. I was thinking primarily. I did say species and NVC. It's the question is related to differences in NVC classification.
Of course. So yes, while we did identify at the kind of more detailed level that there could be different habitats present, that is professional judgment in effect. But what we both clearly found was that there's blanket bog present within this site, and the broad kind of categories we agree on. It's just the kind of the more detailed individual MVC categories that we then would have assigned ourselves. The reason that was part of my inquiry report and why it wasn't part of our consultation responses, we don't normally comment on EIAs, but through this process, when I say normally don't comment on, in our consultation responses, we don't normally comment on them, but in following this process, the applicants were insistent on a number of occasions of including a paragraph stating, I'll paraphrase it, I don't have it in front of me, that the MVC survey was accurate and could be relied upon, and we couldn't agree to that, and it took quite a number of attempts to have that removed. So I thought following that I should explain why we couldn't agree to that. So that's why it was part of my inquiry report.
You're referring to the statement of agreed matters in relation to peatlands?
Yes, sorry, thank you.
Okay. And having in mind the differences in classification and applying Nature Scott's peatland guidance, even if the reporter or ministers were to accept the applicant's views on NVC classification, would that change your view on whether or not applying Nature Scott's guidance, whether or not the Dell 2 development would raise issues of national interest?
It wouldn't, actually, because we both identified that there was blanket bog present, and our guidance goes beyond what you would look for in MVC. and the fact that some of these indicators were present is how we form our opinion on national interest. So both can, you know, in effect be two separate kind of processes, but it wouldn't have changed our response if we adopted the applicant's survey.
Thank you. I think Mr. Trinick may have some questions for you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Trinick, would you welcome a short break just now of 5 minutes, or indeed whether Mr. O'Toole would like a short break before questions? No? Happy to proceed, Mr. Trinick?
Thanks very much. Good morning, Mr. Rantle.
Good morning.
In your inquiry report, Annex 6, you tell us about your qualifications and experience. Does that experience include the authorship of ECIA reports?
No, it does not.
Thank you very much. But I see that you are a member of the Chartered Institute of Ecological and Environmental Management, as is Dr. Massey.
That is correct.
Now, if we go straight to it, as it were, and go to document 436, and I know that's the one that's been superseded, nevertheless, I want to go there first. And if we go to page 6, I think I'm right in saying that this was the first mention of Montane Bog in any Nature Scott guidance.
It was in a previous iteration of this guidance as well, which was used in SPP.
Prior to CD 436.
That is correct.
See on page, well, let's go to page 6 first of all. There's the definition of montane bog, which occurs at altitudes above 600 metres, particularly difficult, sensitive to damage, and incredibly difficult to restore. And on page 8, under sensitivity of habitats, raised bogs and montane bogs, and those have been defined on page 6, so montane bogs have particular high sensitivity, and so we advise they should be entirely avoided. Now, bearing in mind the answer that you gave to Mr. Ferguson in chief, that altitude is one aspect you look at, I would suggest that the advice which you give on page 8 is absolutist. We advise that montane bogs should be entirely avoided. That's so, isn't it?
I would agree it says should, I wouldn't agree it says must.
I'm not going to play with words, but I think the advice is they should be entirely avoided. We can record that. You've already said, though, in evidence in chief, that exposure and latitude can also have an effect on sensitivity of blanket bogs and their restorability. So, and you've already, we can agree this because you said it in chief, that a height of 600 metres in one part of Scotland has different implications to being at 600 metres in another part of Scotland, and in the north and the west of Scotland you can get similar sensitivity much lower down.
I would agree.
Why not express matters in that way in your guidance, and indeed in CD 443, the updated guidance, rather than have this, I won't say fixation, but this emphasis simply on altitude? Above 600 metres should be entirely avoided.
So the reason it's in there is to give a steer, because if we don't give a steer, then it's unclear about where this could apply. And the reason it says should is because it is open to interpretation and people can justify why it should or shouldn't have a development in these locations. This guidance is guidance. It isn't a prescription. Therefore, it doesn't need to cover every single element. That is the job, in effect, of the applicant to explain why they've proposed their development in a location. This is intended as a guide so you or the developers or applicants have an understanding about how we make decisions.
Sorry, I'm moving my microphone on. If we go to CD 211, your first consultation response, on page 2 of that response, you can perhaps see why people in the position of the applicant do regard the guidance, the indications, you call them, in what was CD 436, now CD 443, in rather more absolutist terms. You talk about impacts in the middle of that page. In our view, as stated in our guidance, montane bogs should be completely avoided. I suggest to you again, that's pretty absolutist advice.
I'm just reading the paragraphs around it. I agree that that's what that document says that has been submitted on behalf of Nature Scott. But I do think we make points in other areas that we haven't just based our response on whether or not it's montane bog. We have also looked at our template assessment, which looks for features that are related to near natural condition. So yes, that's a quote from our guidance, and it's fair to have it in there, but we have actually explained it further than that in the other parts of that letter.
And I know that you looked at condition as well, and we'll come on to that. But I'm trying to get some idea of where the advice in this guidance on montane bogs stem from. Is there some scientific paper that we're missing from the inquiry to underpin the advice in the document?
No, this document is intended to be a guide for development. Most research or publications on peatland look at the peatland ecology, of which they're not looking at understanding where peatland could in effect be lost. Therefore, that's why this guidance document has been created to help guide individuals or developers about what could be appropriate and what might not be. And as I say, this montane bog was mentioned in previous iterations of our guidance.
Remember that Dr. Mills yesterday, in giving evidence in chief, recorded document 731, which was by Lee et al. In Earth Science Review. Do you remember that evidence?
I do. I don't have the document to hand. If I
You don't need it, I think, but he said that that was a review of over 680 publications considering peat and erosion. And the collated review of research doesn't mention elevation, altitude, or montane bog at all. The reason I'm raising this, I'm trying to understand what science underpins the advice on montane bog, because both Dr. Massey and Dr. Mills are very puzzled. They have found no such underpinning science.
I think I partially covered that response, but I can mention it again. The science is around peatland ecology. It's not looking at these kind of specifics. But I also think it is well recognised that at higher altitude, habitats are at more of an extreme. They are likely to be more sensitive. And I don't think that is an unfair thing to put in a guidance document to explain where we would approach some of these issues. And I think we've been very fair and open, and this information was available to the applicant before they submitted. Therefore, it was known that we would have this kind of response. So even if there isn't evidence there, we have been very clear about what our position might be.
Even if the evidence isn't there, we are very clear about our position. I'll accept that as an answer. Moving on to one more document, very quickly, there's CD 928, if you could go to that.
Yeah.
I just want to get the status of this report clear. It is simply what it states it to be. It's a research report. It was commissioned. It's not policy or guidance. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Diverting for a moment to your approach to Dell 1, or Dell 2 as comparison with Dell 1. And this isn't a criticism, I'm just noting it. There's no mention in your consultation responses, which are CD 211, 223 and 222, that's to Dell 2, to the previous Dell 1 consent. As a matter of fact, there aren't. I said this was not critical because you would turn around and say to me, well, the applicant didn't do it either, and that's fair. But noting that consent has expired, but that it was live at the time that you were considering the Dell 2 application, did you think to yourself, well, I wonder what the relative impacts of Dell 1 and Dell 2 might be, or ought we not factor that into the process?
No, I didn't. We do assess a case on a site by site, and we do it in an unbiased way. Therefore, that information wasn't looked at. I wasn't involved in that application, and I look at a case when it comes in and judge it on its merits.
See, one of your ambitions at Nature Scott is to be consistent in your approach as between cases so that applicants know what to expect. It's a truism. So I want to look at what happened with the Cloik application. Now, we needn't go there, but I'm recording for the reporter that in CD 71, which was Kate Massey's inquiry report, at paragraph 10.20 on page 61, she makes a comparison between Dell 2 and Cloik. Having said we're not going to go there, we are going to go there, but actually we'll go to the document to which she refers, which is CD 796. Have you read this document, Ms. Rental?
I believe so.
So if you go to page 8 of that document, we can see that Dr. Massey found up on the Cloik site fragments of remaining blanket bog habitat. We can also see, well, I'll leave the reporter to read the document, but it was a mixture of erosion near natural fragments of proper active bog habitat, similar in many ways to Dell 2. Would you agree?
I can't agree, actually. Sorry, I can agree with that. Dr. Massey has submitted this report and has submitted information in her opinion. I can't comment on how similar that is to this application because I'm judging this application. I'm not judging Cloik.
see how Nature Scott dealt with Dell 2. Would you go to document 798? And that is the 21st of November 22 Nature Scott second response to the Cloyk application. And if you go to page, electronic page 2, it's page 1 of the letter itself of the 21st of November. We're going to rehearse some bits of this letter and then ask a question. It's noted in our response to the original proposal, we highlighted the site which contained extensive areas of nationally important montane blanket bog, and indeed at that stage Nature Scott, we know, objected. And the second paragraph refers to meetings with SSE. We indicated that a significant increase in the amount of restoration would be required to remove our objection. Acknowledged that may not be realistically achievable. And the second page records a withdrawal of the outright objection with respect to carbon-rich soils, deep peat and priority peatland habitat, subject to the measures below. And one of those measures was the production of a revised habitat management plan containing a substantial amount of peatland restoration than is currently proposed. If those measures can't be achieved, we would maintain our outright objection. Annex 1, next page, contains a lot more detail. I'll leave the reporter to read it for himself, except that we note that the loss of montane bog had gone down to 43 hectares. We still have significant concerns relating to the scale of impacts on nationally important peatland habitat. Interestingly, in the third paragraph, there's a footnote you see in the second last line. That footnote is to the document that became CD 436, your June 23 advice. That's correct, isn't it?
Sorry, can you identify what page you're talking to, or even the reference of the number of the footnote?
It's an internal page 3, Annex Cloyk Farm, additional information. Third paragraph, second last line. For these reasons, our peatland guidance, and then there's a figure 1, you see that?
Yes, sorry, I see the document you're referring to. Yes, I agree that that is our guidance.
Although that was prior to its issue in June 23, nevertheless, that's the reference to the document. And that document contains the advice I previously rehearsed to you about avoiding montane bog.
Correct.
And the annex goes on to page 4, which confirms at the end of the first paragraph we consider the significance of the impact on montane bog are of national interest. 2 paragraphs later, we welcome the applicant's efforts to include a greater area of peatland restoration of around 150 hectares. When the impacts, about the 6th line, and restoration areas are recalculated, we conclude these proposals would result in a small net loss. At the end of the page, we therefore conclude the proposal would lead to significant impacts of national interest with regard to direct and indirect impacts on montane bog. Nevertheless, the objection on that basis, which was in turn based on the shortly to be published guidance we now know as document 436, it was withdrawn, wasn't it?
Yes.
And let's see what happened in the decision, which is document 795. If we go to page 30 of that document, internal page 30, we see the habitat management plan condition, no development shall commence until, etc., etc. The habitat management plan should provide measurable benefits of biodiversity and shall contain substantially enhanced peatland restoration relative to the outline HMP enhancement of at least 150. So despite the Nature Scott position in its withdrawal, there's no guarantee you're going to get any more restoration than 151 hectares on that basis, is there? That's all the condition requires. Correct?
Correct.
If we go to Kate Massey's annex to her inquiry report, which is document 7.2, and go to electronic page 13 of that document. We can see that for Cloyk, in the third column from the right, predicted loss of bog habitat, 43 hectares. Amount of restoration, well, that's recorded as 150. We don't know whether it will be 150 or more at this stage. And if you look at the Dell 2 figures, the loss of bog habitat, 26 hectares, amount of restoration at 231 hectares. You see that?
I do.
While here, we can also, so as not to have to come back to it again, note that for Dell 1, the predicted loss of habitat was 41 thereabouts hectares, so more than Dell 2. And we'd also note that the amount of restoration for Dell 1 was perhaps a paltry, you might say, 28 hectares, as opposed to 231 hectares for Dell 2. You see that?
I do.
My theme is consistency, Ms. Rantle. I suggest there's been a supremely inconsistent approach by Nature Scott as between Dell 2 and Cloyk.
Is that a question? I would interpret this on some of the points that you've already made about your assumption that our guidance is absolutist about Montane Bog. I would suggest that this demonstrates that we're not, and that we judge cases on a case-by-case basis. And I'm not aware that today we're to judge the merits of what happened with Cloyk.
We're not, but we are here to look at the consistency of Nature Scott as between two very proximate sites and ask ourselves, have we been treated in the same, fairly, frankly? Because if you look at the figures in that, on that page of Kate Massey's appendix, they're pretty stark, aren't they? Loss of bog habitat, Dell 2, 27 hectares, restoration 231, answer, we object. On Cloyk, a loss of 43 hectares, restoration 150, we don't object. I suggest again a supreme example of an inconsistent approach on two very proximate sites. That's the question.
But they're not the same site and they're not the same development.
Very well, have your answer. Turning to approaches to assessment, and here we are onto SAIM and ECIA. On page 19 of your inquiry report, paragraph 67. I'm only going there because that's the first mention in your report to Saeem. I'm not sure we need to go there any other reason. Let's go to document 440 itself, which is Saeem. We go to page 13. We've been here already several times in the inquiry, just noting the various stages of impact assessment, and the first one is the determination of the importance of ecological features affected through survey and research, and with regard to available contextual information. But if we go then to page 29 of the document, there's a chapter here which is of some importance in this inquiry, and that is important ecological features. And we're going over some of the old ground again, but I think we have to. Paragraph 4.3, can you go there, please, on page 29? You've read it. I'm not going to read it out again to the inquiry. It's already been read. But would you agree that the information referred to in the first half of the paragraph provide an objective starting point for identifying the important ecological features? They're a starting point. You agree?
I agree.
Then there's a box that follows, which we've seen. But below that, we have paragraph 4.4. May identify ecological figures not included in lists of important sites, but considered important on the basis of expert judgment, e.g. because of their local rarity, etc., etc. Paragraph 4.5, ecological features might also be important because they play a key functional role in the landscape as stepping stones for migratory species, and so on. I'm not going to read the whole thing. And then 4.6, various characteristics contribute to the importance of ecological features, and then there are a whole series of bullet points that follow which may not be exclusive, may be inclusive, list what surveyors, ecologists might look at. And then 4.7, you've got geographic context, and you're familiar with that.
Yes.
Am I right that these paragraphs, which flow from 4.3, which we rehearsed, tell ECIA surveyors and the writers of reports how to look at evaluating the importance of ecological features? I'm sure that you agree that.
I do indeed.
But you have also agreed that, no, maybe you haven't, let me put it this way, that the fact that there is an Annex 1 habitat on the site is not the be-all and end-all. You don't say there's an Annex 1 habitat and therefore we needn't go through this process. We simply conclude something is of national or even of international importance for the purposes of ECIA. We go a lot further than that, as it clearly advises here. Do you agree?
I agree that just being on Annex 1 isn't where you stop.
Sorry.
I agree that just being Annex 1 isn't where you stop, but if you take into account a number of the points that you have alluded to or highlighted in this document, the blanket bog in this location would meet a number of these requirements. So, but ultimately I agree that this is the process, yes.
This is the process you go through, right. I'm not saying we're going to end up with the same result, but that's the process anyway. You might well conclude differently on importance, and that's a matter of professional judgment. I acknowledge that as well. Let's go on to document 111. Again, familiar territory. And page 12, internal page 12. Now, In your inquiry report at paragraph 66, no need to go there, you describe this table as being standard in ECIA. That's what you say.
I state that.
Yep, let's go to it. Paragraph 66 of your inquiry report. Page 18. The ecology section details the geographic...
Right, can I just ask for 1 second so I can get my document?
Sorry, my apologies.
And if I could just remind both just to switch on and off the mics, just so we get the camera pointed to the right person.
Sorry about that.
I have the right document, sorry, which page or paragraph?
Paragraph 66.
Thank you.
And you say there the ecology section details the geographical importance of the ecological features. This table, which is table 6.2, is something that is standard in an ECIA assessment. I'm just recording you say that.
I do. I would
That is, sorry. If that is the standard form of table that is used, I'm not sure there's anything surprising in it for you in terms of the levels of geographical importance and the way it's set out. I mean, is anything in there which is a surprise to you?
Well, I would say I say the table is standard. I didn't say its contents were standard.
Okay. But you see the four levels, international, national. It was explained by Dr. Massey when she gave evidence how she applied that table. I didn't hear any direct cross-examination on that basis, disagreement with what she said. 1% of habitats at a national level, or less at a regional level, or 0.05%, 0.5% at a local level. I mean, that's what Kay Massey has done. She's applied this table, which you acknowledge to be a standard table.
I'm not sure that I could agree with that because the sentence under national says sites supporting more than 1% of the UK population of a species. It doesn't say habitat.
No, it doesn't. And as Dr. Massey explained, over very many ECIAs, which you haven't carried out, as you agreed, this is the approach which she has taken to habitats. You apply the same approach.
I agree.
Do you have any quarrels with that?
I agree it's the assessment that she's adopted.
Yeah, well, that's a truism, but do you take any exception to her approach to the 1% of habitat?
I think I've already explained that the guidance refers to other things as well about national lists, and so we have already covered the fact that in professional opinion we might have differences.
I see where we differ. If we go to table 6.10,
Sorry, is this the...
it's in the CD 111.
Okay, thank you.
When I'm efficient enough to find a page, I'll give it to you. Page 34.
Thank you.
And this is where, to put it colloquially, everything comes out the end of the tap in terms of the evaluation of importance, isn't it?
I struggle with that question a little because I don't, while I agree that communities have been identified and the potential conservation status has been identified and potential WDTE have been identified, the comment section I don't think covers the other sections that are mentioned in the ECIA guidance. But I agree that this is where the author thinks they have done that.
If you turn to our area of strongest disagreement, it'll be on page 35 of Blanket Bog, won't it? Because that's where you say the ecological value should be national, we say regional. We know why we differ. We're not going to reach agreement, so I'm not going to ask more questions about that, but that's our point of disagreement, isn't it?
Yes,
Right.
in ECIA.
Drawing the threads together, I make a suggestion that where Dr. Massey said you've gone wrong and where I suggest that you have gone wrong is simply by equating a statement of importance because of Annex 1 with ecological value in a specific geographical context, that is, in this case, the Dell 2 site. You've equated the two wrongly.
I don't know that I would agree with the term wrong. I think we've equated it in our expert judgment.
Have you really? I mean, I don't see professional judgment coming in there. What I do see is you saying that Blanket Bog is in Annex 1 to the EU directive, ergo it's of international importance. I wouldn't call that a scientific judgment. I'd call it reading a document and saying, well, that's what it says, therefore it is.
That might be your opinion, but I have taken into account other factors. So in the ECIA guidance 440, paragraph 4.6, it talks about various characteristics contribute to the importance of ecological features. There are a number of there that could be applied in this instance, and I don't see how the applicant has covered many of these points. I also don't understand entirely how they've taken into account the sensitivity, the magnitude is questionable as well. And I think it's fair to say we agree we have a difference of opinion at this point.
Well, if you look at paragraph 416, we know what it says. I'm not going to read it out. But Dr. Massey would say, well, yeah, actually we have taken that into account in table 410 under potential conservation status and in the comments made. Now, we know we disagree, but I would suggest to you that the applicant has taken into account the advice in paragraph 416 and indeed that in 417, because as she said yesterday, the indicators of ecological value for Blanket Bog could have been said to be local, but because of the potential for restoration, paragraph 648 of the ECIA, the importance was elevated to regional. So I think I just have to disagree with you. I think that the applicant has taken full account of the advice in those two paragraphs.
I agree, that's your opinion.
I'm asking you to agree that's what the applicant has done.
If that's what you're telling me.
I'm not telling you, it's a question to you. I'm suggesting to you that there's clear evidence on the basis of what Dr. Massey has said, on the basis of table 610 in the ECIA, that a proper account has been taken of the factors listed in paragraph 416, and even more account has been taken of the factors in 417 by the elevation of the regional importance from local. But you may not agree with the result, but I suggest to you that is what the applicant has done and done properly.
It's not up to me to judge that, but okay.
Well, it is. You're Nature Scott and you're giving evidence of the inquiry. It's a fair enough question. Would you like to answer it?
Can you repeat the question?
Of course. You took me to paragraph 416 as a partial explanation of why you hadn't simply gone to Annex 1 to the EU directive and said, it's Annex 1, it ticks the international box, there you go. And I accept perhaps that's not what you've entirely done. But you took me to paragraph 416 and said that needs to be taken into account as well. My suggestion to you and my question to you is actually the applicant has taken into account 416 and even more 417 because of elevation from local to regional, as evidenced in table 610. That's my suggestion to you.
For me, it's not that clear. In all honesty, it's not clear. I don't see the breakdown of some of this. And 417, I think, is quite clear, where there may be cases where important habitat types are affected, but they are currently in degraded or unfavourable condition, which is what has been stated in that table that you refer to. For example, peatlands in the guidance. Whilst the current baseline condition of a habitat may be suboptimal, its potential value should be considered. I don't see where that has been taken into account in those paragraphs. So I agree that you think it's been very clear and has covered all of these points. I'm saying that I can't clearly identify some of the steps.
I think I'll take you finally to, in CD 111I, the ECIA, to page 52. Paragraph 648. And you'll see from the fifth last line, the sentence, despite evidence, you see that?
Yes, I do.
And if you read that through, you will see that the recognition that although there was evidence of severe peat erosion degradation, significant areas of bare peat depth, extent, poor qualities of other areas of degraded mire. Despite that, sentence is not brilliant, indicate the area has potential for measures to facilitate reversal of erosion processes to blanket bog, as well as recognising carbon storage potential, is therefore to be considered of regional value. That is surely a clear indication that the applicants had in mind in the ECIA the need to have regard to what is said in paragraphs 416 and 417 of the ECIA. That's a question.
I think that is explaining that this habitat can be restored, which is also backed up by Dr. Mills's report, saying that restoration is something that's proposed here. I think it's not clear where the starting point was to then take this into account to reach the regional level. Was it considered, was it always considered as regional, or was it considered national and then downgraded, or was it local and upgraded? I'm not clear on that. All I know is they've said that it could be restored and they consider it to be of regional value.
I think it is clear, but I'll leave 648 for the reporters to read. I think we've taken that point as far as we can. Well, let's contrast the approach in the ECIA with your approach. And I'm noting from the start that it's absolutely not for Nature Scott to carry out the ECIA. That's the applicant's job. I get that totally. What you're doing is to appraise the ECIA and related material in order to come to a view on whether or not as a matter of national interest arises. That's
correct.
I understand it's your exercise. But when I read your inquiry report, I looked at I call them target notes, I'm probably using the wrong phrase, but from paragraph 27, you look at parts of the track, and then you move on to turbines, and that section ends at page 15, or the text ends at page 14, paragraph 54. And then you go on to look at assessment of national interest, which goes on to paragraph 64. I was getting a bit puzzled by this stage because I then came on to your appraisal of the chapter, ECIA chapter we've been through, ecological value, page 20, the FEI, Alba ecology, and that goes on right to paragraph 84. And I turned over thinking, right, let's go on to, on to the impact evidence. But there wasn't any. Your evidence, this inquiry, is entirely geared to the baseline, isn't it? It's geared to the back to Montaigne Bog, your evaluation of the condition of the bog, the Annex 5 template having been completed, perceived restoration difficulties. But I'm correct, you give absolutely no impact evidence, i.e. magnitude, sensitivity, significance, no impact evidence at all, do you?
No, but I follow our guidance.
Sorry, I'm missing a point here. The basis for your claim of national interest sufficient to warrant an objection is based entirely and wholly on your evaluation of the baseline. There is no critique, appraisal of the impact assessment, the findings of significance in the ECIA at all in your evidence, is there?
I didn't do an assessment of ECIA, that's correct.
My question was quite precise, I'll ask it again. Your evidence is entirely geared to baseline, put it bluntly. You give no appraisal of the ECIA impact evidence whatsoever, do you?
No.
Right. So you can't, in this inquiry, claim to take issue with the applicant's assessment of the magnitude of impact or with the significance of that impact. You don't bring the evidence to do so, do you?
I haven't stated it in here because it's not something we would regularly comment on, but it's a document that's been submitted by the applicant of which we have reviewed and considered. We don't carry out our own individual ECIA assessment and come to those conclusions. What our purpose is to advise the decision maker on the appropriateness of a development, and to do that we follow our guidance that we've already mentioned, and it's up to the decision maker to take all of these into account.
Ms. Rental, I have seen too many Nature Scott responses over very many years, and I have seen plenty in which issue has been taken with an applicant's assessment of the magnitude of impacts, whether in relation to landscape and visual effects or ecological effects. My question to you, I think I have the answer, is in the evidence you bring to this inquiry for the reporter, as the only evidence, your inquiry report, you do not engage on the magnitude of change, you do not appraise what the ECIA says in that respect, you do not appraise what the ECIA says about significance of impacts, you do not disagree with the significance of impacts. You don't play in that game at all. You're solely looking at the baseline. As a matter of fact, that is correct, isn't it?
It's correct to some extent.
Okay, to what extent is it incorrect?
Just because we haven't raised it as a point of issue doesn't mean to say that we agree with the assessment. We use the EIA information to be able to gather information to make a determination. If we can make that determination using the information provided, it's not in anyone's interest for us to, in effect, waste the applicant's time to make sure it's of a standard that we need. What the information did provide was enough information for me to make my advice with the use of a site visit as well to gather that information, to follow our guidance, to complete our assessment. So just because we haven't on this occasion brought that information here today doesn't mean to say we haven't taken it into account, nor does it suggest that we fully agree with what's been submitted.
But that, with respect, is of no use to the reporter at all. He has the evidence he has in front of him. He cannot take account of evidence which you failed to bring to the inquiry. He has what he has. So in terms of the evidence which you have brought in your inquiry report, it's quite clear that I'm right, isn't it? You do not engage on impact evidence. I think we've been there and you agree.
I agree, it's not in the evidence. It's
Thank
also
you.
not my position to determine what the reporter needs or doesn't.
I mean, paragraph 63 of your inquiry report, page 17, is as far as you go, and it's a good paragraph to refer to on page 17, sir. As the development included loss of peatland that is classed as montane bog, and the quality value of the habitats was high, loss of the peatland raises matters of national interest. With this being the case, the loss of this peatland of importance, such importance that it means that offsetting would not be sufficient to overcome the impacts. That is the basis of your objection, summarised.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. You didn't think it necessary to articulate to the reporter, never mind what's in your mind, articulate to the reporter that any disagreements you have with the applicant on impact, you haven't thought at all in your inquiry report to engage on restoration beyond saying that it's difficult to restore at higher altitudes, correct?
Correct.
Dr. Mills has brought evidence, which you heard yesterday. There was one question in cross-examination had nothing to do with restoration. Has Nature Scott simply ceded that ground to the applicant?
I don't understand your question. Ceded what ground? That a restoration can be carried out?
Yes, precisely. Dr. Mills has brought extensive evidence to this inquiry about restoration at altitude, not only at Ridge Dell, which we'll invite the reporter to go to, but also 6,755 hectares of restored land above 600 metres under peatland action, sponsored by Nature Scott. We've heard not a dicky bird in this inquiry to criticise that evidence, have we?
No, nor would I want to.
Nor would you want to. Well, let's cut to the chase. Do you therefore accept that whatever your concerns about altitude and the implications for restoration, Dr. Mills' evidence is good evidence. It can be done, it has been done, on a site very proximate to this one at Ridge Dell. You have no evidence to the contrary.
So there are a couple of things there. I'll take the latter one first. To draw a conclusion on Ridge Dell at the moment is, in my opinion, far too early. It was only completed, it was a 2-year project and it was only completed last year. To draw conclusions from the success of that at this moment is premature. And determining whether or not restoration can be carried out at altitude, I think we've got evidence to show that there are attempts for this to happen. But what crucially is important is that just because you can restore something, it doesn't justify the loss at this location or this altitude. So while restoration can occur, it doesn't mean to say it should come at the cost of loss.
Why have we heard no evidence from Nature Scott in this inquiry about that? And a question to your advocate rather than to you. Why was there no engagement with Dr. Mills on the evidence that he gave? I'm very puzzled if you're saying what you now say.
So I think we have mentioned that we are content with Dr. Mills's proposal for restoration, even with the inclusion of novel techniques that are unproven. But what we are saying is the value of the habitat at this location cannot be lost for a development but then mitigated or offset, or whatever terms you want to use. I would use it as offset by doing some restoration. We've already talked about the importance of peatland and how, in effect, it can't be created. Once it's lost in these areas where they've got indicators of near natural, it is in a sensitive location, we have to consider that and take that into account. And I think we've been very clear in our guidance about pointing people towards the fact that we are likely to be more concerned about development in these locations. Just because we haven't interrogated Dr. Mills, that's a separate step. The consideration of offsetting is after consideration of whether or not this development is in the right location.
The problem with all that, apart from the fact you haven't engaged with Dr. Mills, is that we have this missing layer of evidence from Natural England. You've read the ECIA, you have read the conclusion that the effect significance is low adverse and not significant. You have not engaged with that. You simply said, loss of peatland at this altitude, high quality, that's enough for us, whatever the quantum of loss. That's as far as your evidence goes.
Well, I agree. Our evidence goes as far as our guidance requires it to.
Well, okay. Let's turn to your site visit, so that would be a convenient moment to break.
Yep, I'm happy to break just now. That'll give Mr. Dewar a break. Could we return at 11 o'clock, do you think?
10 o'clock.
11 o'clock.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. I thought I was wrong for a minute. We'll return at 11. Okay, I think that we've reached 11 o'clock now, and we can make a start to continuing Mr. Trinnick's cross-examination of the witness. Mr. Trinnick, do you have a rough estimate of time that you have to go?
I'd say another hour and a half.
So on that basis, it would be likely that that would take us to lunch, and then deal with my questions and re-examination after lunch. That's just to give the witness an indication of where we're probably going, I think. But we won't hold you to that, Mr. Trinnick.
Thank you.
Over to you, Mr. Trinnick.
Thank you, Mr. Rentoul. I want to go on now to your site visit. If you go to your inquiry report at paragraph 18 on page 5, so I'm just missing it. Here we are. You tell us your assessment of habitat for purposes of this report was carried out from the information you give there, and I won't rehearse that. In paragraph 20, habitat assessments carried out by navigating to location of relevant turbine bases, or turbine's base, assessing habitat as well as surrounding vegetation. This is so the assessment includes an accurate representation of habitat and location of the turbine base, hard standing and tracks to ensure all the habitats will be affected by the development accurately represented, identified, etc. And impacts can be robustly assessed. You amplify that slightly in your document 937, which is the detail you provided more recently. In paragraph 6 and 7. And you tell us in paragraph 6 where you went in your May 24 site visit. At each of the locations, paragraph 7, the guidance template form is completed. That's the annex 5 to your inquiry report, that one. Yep, I got that. Including a micrositing allowance. The aim of this is to consider whether or not the criteria in the template form are present within the vicinity of the infrastructure. If these are present, no need to extend the survey to a greater area, for example, the full 250 metre buffer stated in the guidance. So that's the background to the questions I'm going to put to you. First of all, what did you take with you on your May 24 site visit?
I assume you don't want a full list of every single item I
Well, I
carried,
don't want
but
the pencil and so on, no, but what was the basic information you took with you?
I took a peak depth survey that was submitted by the applicant's MVC survey, a copy of our assessment template. Those, from memory, are the key documents that I took with me.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Now, you've seen this 7.131 we need to go to, which is the applicant's clarification figure, which were allowed into the inquiry. Can you get that in front of you?
Yes, I've got it.
Now, let's see what it does first of all. We got the site boundary there. The black line is the line of the access track. The blue line is important. That's the route of your site visit, taken from your own Appendix 2 map. I assume you had a handheld GPS, so that was the
I used my watch.
watch, okay, understand. And it shows the proposed infrastructure. We note in particular the temporary construction compound, CC3. We can note the substation, which is in purple. turbine locations. Now, so far as the turbines are concerned, we can see that you went to turbines in order 5, 3 and 2 to the precise locations. You went to within, I think, about 100 metres, scaling as best we can, of turbines 6 and 7. Would you agree?
Yes.
We went to within, we say, about 250 metres of turbine 1. We say that because of the 250 metre buffer drawn around turbine 2. And as far as turbines 4, 8 and 9 are concerned, our reading is you went to within about 600 metres of them. You'd accept that?
I would.
And in terms of the track, from where you entered the site, we can see that you ran along it for a bit in the northern part, departed from it, crossed over it again, met it again near CC3. Actually, I'm not sure you didn't cross the track again, did you? Except insofar as you went to turbines 5, 3 and 2. That was it so far as the track is concerned. Is that pretty accurate?
Well, I think that the line in this information in the document you're proposing suggests I crossed the track between the substation and turbine 7.
Oh, you did, you're right. Yep.
And, yeah, turbine 2 as well.
Christopher. No, well, I accept you went to turbines 5, 3 and 2, so you would be bound to be on the track, so
Yes, sorry.
that's fine. Now, I'm going to preface my next question by saying, yet again, I know it's not for Nature Scott to carry out the ECIA, but I would suggest that it's incumbent on Nature Scott, when appraising the ECIA, to make that a very thorough appraisal, especially if you're minded to find a national interest and to object. You would accept that?
I'm sorry, I would like to answer your question, but you've added two things together. You've talked about an appraisal of the ECIA and assessment of national interest. Now, those are two separate processes.
Let me rephrase the question. It's not for you to carry out the ECIA, but I suggest to you that if you are appraising an ECIA, knowing, which you knew because of your Montaigne Bog guidance, that national interest issues might arise, it's incumbent on you to make that appraisal pretty thorough. Would you agree?
Yes, I would.
So, for example, if we look at paragraph 54 of the inquiry report, '53, the site visit did not cover the area and proposed infrastructure, turbines 7 to 8, 8 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 9, did not cover the proposed infrastructure from turbine 3 to 1. Area was partly seen during the site visit on 1st of April 26. That was the site visit we went with Dr. Massey and Dr. Mills, wasn't it?
On the 1st of April 26, yes.
Yeah, when it was snowing, I think. It didn't help
Indeed
terribly.
it was, yes.
Yeah. So while these areas were not seen during my assessment, they appear from looking at a distance during the site visit and from looking at aerial imagery, they were similar habitats to that seen during the rest of the site visit. Now, we take issue with that. You heard Dr. Massey say yesterday, do you remember she recorded the site visit that she, Dr. Mills, and I did last Saturday?
I do, yes.
And carried out an exercise of making poor Dr. Mills wander away somewhere, 100 metres, 250 metres, and asking Dr. Massey, well, at that distance, could you make, what could you tell about the phase 1 habitat and the MVC communities at that distance? And her answer was, you might obtain, as an experienced ecologist, you might obtain a reasonable impression of the likely result of a phase 1 habitat survey. Nevertheless, in order to evaluate the species and the MVC accurately at a specific location, you've got to go there and ground truth it. You heard that evidence.
I did indeed.
Do you agree with that?
I do.
Thank you. Let's cut out some questions. Having regard to that very clear answer you gave me, and noting the route of your site visit, noting the areas and turbine locations you did not visit to within a minimum of 100 metres and up to 400 metres, up to 600 metres, are you really saying that your assessment includes an accurate representation of the habitat in the location of the turbine base, hard standing and tracks for the Dell 2 site?
I am saying that I did an accurate representation of the habitat that is surrounding and within the areas that will be impacted by the development at the locations I went to.
How is that possible? You didn't go there.
Well, it is possible because you've seen where I have been, and I have taken...
Sorry, can you...
Sorry. It's possible because you have seen where I have been, and you have seen where I have carried out my assessment. I would also like to add that the applicant doesn't provide shapefiles for us to use to accurately find some of these. So I'm actually very impressed that we managed to get to some of these areas on our own, using the information that we had. Now, yes, I agree that we were very close to some, but maybe not exactly on them. That could be differences in GPS accuracy, and it could also be other factors. But we were on site, we chose specific locations that we wanted to look at, that we had concerns about, and our approach is to take an assessment of the habitat that could be impacted by this proposal, and I think it's fair to say we covered quite a large area. The use of aerial imagery was also used because you can pick up what could be different polygons from the information that's there when you're experienced at looking at these things, and so that is why a rational approach was taken so that we could do it in the time that was available. And we found from that I could make the conclusions that I did.
Your answer baffles me. I put a very specific question to you, that although you might retain a reasonable impression of phase 1 habitats, in order to properly evaluate species MBC accuracy, absolutely necessary to ground truth the information by going to the locations. Did you agree? Yes, you said, quite categorically in answer to that question. Now, looking at the route of your site visit, you have not gone. I mean, GPS accuracy, it may be plus or minus 10 metres, whatever it is, but it's not plus or minus 400 metres. So you've produced the route of your site visit. We've taken the information you provided, and you have not commented in your evidence on its accuracy. You visited the locations we've pointed out. You have not been anywhere near turbines 4, 8 and 9, 250 metres away from another, and 100 metres away from 2 others. And I cannot understand, on the basis of the clear answer you gave to me about the need to ground truth, how you could possibly claim that your assessment includes paragraph 20, an accurate representation of the habitat in the location of the turbine bases, hard standings and tracks. I suggest very strongly that is simply not possible on the basis of your site visit.
Sir, I don't want to to interrupt the evidence. However, I think I have a question for clarification which may save some time in re-examination.
I think if we let the witness answer first, and then if you still have that question, I think we can come to you, Mr. Ferguson. But I think the question is there, and I think Mr. Rintoul was just about to answer it.
My site visit and the information required within this provides information on areas I did go to, and assessment has been made at those. I have suggested that it's likely that some of the habitat could be similar across these distances from the information that was available to me, but I haven't said for certainty that I have confirmed or not the phase 1 or the MVC for some of these other areas. My assessment doesn't have to cover the whole site or every turbine. It can cover the proportion that it needs to be able to make an assessment. And the fact that I did go to so many of the locations as detailed, or in very close proximity to them, especially when you take into account micrositing, I think it is fair that I have made an assessment on the locations that I have gone to. I will take your point that it's hard to draw conclusions on areas that I was over 400 metres away from your measurements. That's fair. But my assessment is based on what I did look at. And the assessment and in our guidance is looking at the context in which a development is located. And I think I have fairly made an assessment on that.
Mr. Trinick, I think I did say to Mr. Ferguson, I'd allow him in. Is that a point of kind of procedure or?
Be very careful, Mr. Ferguson. This is cross-examination.
Yeah, I just.
Indeed, it was the clear clarification which Mr. Rintoul gave about the requirement for ground truthing. Can you explain, please, what you meant?
No.
I think.
Well,
No.
I think, Mr. Ferguson, I think you'll have the opportunity to re-examine your witness at the end. So, whilst you may be eager to do that just now, I think it's probably still Mr. Trinick's turn. So, we'll leave it with Mr. Trinick.
Thank you. Well, since I know the point is going to be put into doubt, let's put it beyond doubt now. For the third time, the question I asked you very precisely, I know it's precise because I wrote it down. While an experienced ecologist might obtain a reasonable impression of the likely result of a phase 1 habitat survey from a distance of 100 metres or so, in order to evaluate the species at an MBC accurately at a specific location, it is absolutely necessary to ground truth the information if reliance is to be placed on it. And you said yes.
I did.
Thank you. Very clear. Did you request shape files for your site visit?
This is hard for me to answer from my memory. I normally do, and I normally don't receive them. Whether it happened on this case, I couldn't tell you at this point.
Fair answer. But coming back to your paragraph 20, which is central to what we're talking about. I'm not going to read it again, but I would invite the reporter just to read it quickly before I put the question. And could you read it quickly before I put the question? Your last sentence, this, as you described, is to ensure that all of the habitat that will be affected by the development is accurately represented, identified, and impacts in assessed. You can't claim that, can you, on the basis of your site visit?
Yeah, that's fair.
That's fair. You agree, right? Finally, on this aspect of the site visit, because we have not finished with it yet. If you look at the note 937 that you provided to the inquiry after the evidence was submitted, You look at paragraph 10. Sorry, paragraph 13, my apologies. This is about the April site visit. We accepted the invitation to it, the site visit, drove to the same endpoint, etc. We walked up to. We then visited parts of the sites that the applicant's witnesses wanted to show us. Now, am I correct that a suggested itinerary for the site visit was sent to you? I've recorded the date. I don't expect you to remember the date. It was the 26th of March, 26, with an offer to incorporate any areas of interest to you. You remember that?
Yes.
You didn't reply, did you?
I don't know that it was sent directly to me, so I don't know if anyone did reply, but we didn't suggest any locations.
No. You might want to moderate, therefore, what you say in the paragraph 13 of that note. Would you agree?
Well, no, I think that's still fair because we did visit the locations that the applicant wanted to go to.
Yeah, I think you have my point. Note again at paragraph 10. You refer in the third line, completion of my advice note included assessment of whether the applicant has followed the mitigation hierarchy. Is that advice note before this inquiry?
I haven't checked every document, but you have seen it as part of an FOI.
It came as part of the FOI bundle. That particular note is in there, is it?
Yes. I believe so.
I'll accept that answer, sir, but we might want to check the point. It will be checked. Now, I'm going to turn shortly to what you actually saw on your site visit and compare that with the clarification provided by the applicant. We'll do that in a moment. But if we go back to paragraph 10 of your additional note 937 again.
Sorry, did you say paragraph 10?
Yes, I did.
Sorry, thank you.
After the site visit, template form was transposed from the field paper version to electronic version. Normally, I also do this with the species list, but on this occasion I did not, and the handwritten note is no longer available. If you go on to paragraph 19, this is where you're writing your inquiry report. In 18, you say, as such, a more detailed look at phase 1 and MBC survey supplied by the applicant were considered in my report to explain why we couldn't agree to this part of the statement of agreed matters, that being the part referred to in chief this morning. To do this, I partially recreated the species list from memory. And this is the missing list that you didn't retain as recorded in paragraph 10. And for use of photos on the personal and mobile phone, we know about that. And 12 additional emails were photos emailed to my work email, etc., etc. So when writing your inquiry report in terms of paragraphs 26 to about 47, i.e. your record of what you saw on site, partly based on your memory of a site visit which took place 2 years ago.
Correct.
Now, before going on to the next bit of this topic, and the reporter will say to me, yeah, I know all that, I don't need this to me telling, but I want to get clear, just so we are agreed, the purpose of two documents. The Phase 1 habitat survey, we can agree, is to provide a list of broad categories for the whole of the site Never mind where the infrastructure is, you look at the whole of the site. Agreed.
Agreed?
The MVC, as should always be the case, should also be done of the whole site at a sufficient level of detail to make it a valid baseline assessment for the assessment of the impacts of infrastructure in any location within the site. That's the purpose of the exercise.
Yes.
We're fully agreed. Now, let's go to against that background, 27131 again. And I'm not going to go through every page because these are largely generic points, so I can take it fairly quickly. If we go to the second page of that document, we read this, don't we, with paragraphs 28 and 29 of your inquiry report. So you might have that alongside you as well. First, let's just rehearse what this does. The second, the left of the green-headed columns corresponds with your paragraph 28, doesn't it? There's the MVC you report there.
Well, I wouldn't say to the left, I'd say underneath the green headings.
Sorry?
Yes, I would agree. Yeah, the
Agree,
green
yeah.
headings identify what we've
Yeah.
put in.
And you reported in paragraph 29 that that indeed is what the applicant also reported. But that's not quite right, is it? Because if you look at well, let's look at the images first of all. You've got the aerial image on the left, obviously, and the image on the right is the EIAR MVC material, isn't it?
Yes.
Yep. Now we know from the first page that, and I wish we'd actually endorsed your blue route on these images, it would have been easier, and I apologise for not doing it, but if we compare the first page of 7131, we can see that, because we know where we are from what you've told us, you're in the northern part of the site, between where you enter the site and the temporary construction compound. So that's the route. And coming down there, you encountered, as you recorded, M19B, M19C. But I suggest also that further south, you must have also encountered quite a lot of bare peat.
Yes.
Yep. But that's not recorded in your inquiry report, is it?
No, and I can explain why.
Sure.
I take on board this document that you've submitted, 7131, and that does include a far greater range of habitats. And I guess what's been put into the inquiry report is my assessment at a location where I made this assessment, and I've drawn information then from the ecology chapter for that same location. So apologies, it's not the whole track that I was identifying the MVC for. Yes, there will have been elements of bare peat, but that whether or not that was at that location, I don't know that it was, and actually I would probably strengthen that and say where I took that assessment there wasn't bare peat, but within the vicinity there could well be, especially on some of the access routes.
But do we know from your report or from any map exactly where along this route you made the notes which result in what we see in your inquiry report? Are we able to pinpoint the location?
For some of them you could, but I would agree for this track section that might be more challenging.
Okay. Is this because of the lost field notes?
Let me think. Potentially.
Okay. We go on to, and very briefly, because we're doing the same thing again, we're looking at the temporary construction compound onto the substation, onto turbine 7. So the reporter, if he goes back to page 1, he can follow your route and where you were for these paragraphs. Again, you can't tell us precisely where you were in this section, in the bottom right image, where you made your target note.
Sorry. Well, I would suggest it was the point of where the blue line is closest to the substation. Or are we talking about the construction compound? Either or, the assessment will have been done at the point at which, or within the vicinity of where the blue line is in close proximity to the bit of infrastructure that I'm referring to.
Yeah, your route, we can see, touched the northeast corner of that compound. So that's where the note would have been taken.
Yes, it would.
Yeah, fair enough. I accept that. No, I think we've covered that otherwise. Then we go on to the turbine locations. Now it's easier here because obviously you made the target notes. Did you, hang on, did you go turbine 6? I can't remember. You went within of roughly 100 metres of turbine 6.
Fair.
And your record for turbine 6 is Bear Peat and Blanket Bog. Communities M3, M17B. We've already been through the highlighted yellow additional communities. I won't go back to that. That was a generic point. But I just want to take something slightly out of sequence. I don't normally do this, but I want to for a good reason. If you go to Annex 5 to your inquiry report, and you follow the horizontal line by turbine 6, you're asking the reporter to accept, bearing in mind our points about accuracy earlier on, that 100 metres you're able to record under criterion 3 all the yeses that you've inserted for that turbine location. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
At 100 metres you can answer those questions, can you?
So this is part of what our assessment includes. The grid reference for that turbine base is in the middle of a peat pan. Therefore, it would be unlikely that you would want to go to that point in the first instance, which is why I didn't. And I went around that area because it's not just that turbine grid reference centre point that is impacted, it's the habitat around it. So this assessment is not just that specific grid reference, it was looking at the habitat that's also surrounding it, which could be included in micrositing distances.
Yeah, I get that.
But also hard standings, tracks and all of that kind of thing. So it is possible to draw a conclusion of the assessment and make these yeses, or in brackets no for this one, for some bits, within 100 metres of that point for the reasons I have explained, and why that would be a reasonable thing to do.
All right, well, we'll come back to, when we come back to Annex 5. That's helpful, thank you. I'm not sure we need to go to the other figures because we've illustrated to the reporter the approach you took, and I'm being told I do need to go somewhere. Yes, turbine 5, just one final question. the MVC reported for turbine 5, which you record where is it?
Paragraph 38, I think.
Thank you very much. Wet modified bog, flush spring, acid neutral flush, that's what you record here. So those communities, M15C and M6, I think I'm right, are not on the list for montane bog, are they?
I specifically for montane bog, no, but they are included in the list for blanket bog. Sorry, I should clarify that. M15 is, not M6.
Yes, okay, I accept that. No, I think we can put that document down now. There were some generic points I wanted to take through it, and we've done that. Just on the ecological baseline, I have one or two final points to clarify. If we go to paragraph 70 of your inquiry report, yeah, the assessment of habitats. This is a critique of Trax Ecology's work. The assessment of habitats includes a modified blanket bog, which I suggest should be classified as blanket bog in phase 1, mainly due to there being no category for modified blanket bog within phase 1 assessments. And you make the same point in your post-inquiry report note 937, no need to go there, so paragraph 9. Prior to the site visit, I noted that the phase 1 survey map has a category that is not listed in the phase 1 guidance. Would you turn up, please, CD48? And within that, go to electronic page 40. Tell me when you're there.
Electronic page 40.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, I'm there.
Headed habitat definition. So that's the section we're in. And we go to electronic page 44. We have E1 bog. And do we see under bog, first of all, there's blanket bog. And bear in mind, this is the JNCC handbook for phase 1 surveys. Blanket bog, and on the next page, raised bog, and then wet modified bog, and then dry modified bog. Those are the 4 categories. Now, I would love it if all consultants were consistent in their use of terminology all the time. We know it doesn't happen, but can I suggest that those sorts of terms are used for bog? And while you're technically correct that modified blanket bog is not listed in the JNCC advice, you are making a distinction without a difference.
In effect, yes, but what added to the confusion as well is when that habitat was identified in the survey reports, the colour coding that's stated in this document, if you go further down, the colour coding used was for dry modified bog, but in the ecology section there's reference to wet modified bog. So I understand that different terminology, but actually this was a little confusing when I was reviewing the information prior to going out, and I thought it, again, this was something I wouldn't have brought up if it hadn't been something that as the applicant had tried to put into the statement of agreed matters on multiple occasions. So I thought this was a reason why I had to say what I did, because I didn't think it would be accurate for me to confirm that potentially the wrong colour category had used compared to what's in the ecology report, and that it wasn't a term that's within this document. So I was up against that. So I understand that an error could have been made, but the reason it's in there is for the reasons I've just mentioned.
That's a fair answer. If you go to CD 436, what I'm turning to now is the dreadful word active, and the advice which is given, first of all, on page 5 of CD 436. Third paragraph under priority peatland habitat, second line, and this is the definition of priority peatland in this document, is peatland that corresponds to the below habitat communities and shows evidence of being undisturbed and actively forming peat. And then there are the MVC communities which are listed below M1, M2, M3, and others below M17, M19, and so forth. We then go to document 443, which is the 2026 update of the 23 guidance, and we go to page 6, where again there's a definition in the last paragraph on page 6, second line. Priority peatland is peatland that can have evidence of being undisturbed and contains species which are capable of forming peat. That obviously differs from the 23 definition, and the current definition 26, I accept that. But I want to know what the implications of that change are and understand them for this inquiry. If I phrased it this way, you can tell me I'm an idiot and I got it wrong. I don't mind what you say, but I'm trying to get to the difference between the two. Is the change really from defining priority peatland in our context today as bog capable of sequestering carbon to bog containing species which might indicate an ability for the bog to sequester carbon, but that bog is not actually sequestering at that moment?
So you've brought in a new term of
Yes.
sequestering carbon, and that's not what this is looking at. This is
Right.
looking at the habitat and whether it's capable of peat formation, not looking at the emissions potentially, or the emissions or the potential sink of carbon. That would be something separate.
Okay. So let's follow this through a bit further. I think the reporter does need to understand if there are any implications of the change between 23 and 26. In 23, it says evidence of undisturbed and actively forming peat. So 23. So in 26, you're saying, well, if there are species there which are indicator species of active peat, such as Areoforum vaginatum, Areoforum angustifolium, and sphagnum species, if you've got those sorts of species there, or communities there, that's an indication that the bog might be active or is active. Which?
So there's a reason why definitions of active use normally peat forming. The presence of vegetation that is normally peat forming is a statement in there. It doesn't require proof of actual peat accumulation. Peat formation is only evident when the material passes into the long-term store, and that can take a century or more. So that's why we don't look for that evidence, and why that term normally is put in place. And the fact that those species are capable of forming peat is in effect the proxy that is used for this purpose.
Yeah. But that rather takes us back to ground truthing, doesn't it? Because saying that there are species in a particular location which indicate that the bog will be normally peat forming doesn't actually mean it is active, and you can only, I would suggest, on the basis of Dr. Massey, determine that through ground truthing and going up close and personal and looking to see whether it really is active peat or not.
I would actually disagree with that statement, sorry. I don't, as I've mentioned, evidence to prove if something is actively formed peat would take centuries. It's not possible to do that on a site visit, multiple site visits within 2 years. It could be even 10 years. That wouldn't be sufficient to be able to prove that point. What the definitions look for are whether these species are present. Now, the reason they talk about the presence of these species is these species are there, they're wetland specialists. Now, the habitat reflects the water level. And if you don't have waterlogged conditions, these species won't be present. And when I talk about waterlogging, active peatland, which if you want to use these terms, tends to use a water level of between 5 to 10 centimetres of the surface. It doesn't say that it's at the surface or above the surface. That is where it needs to be. So if these species are present, then the habitat that's there must have these conditions for them still to be present. That's why we look for the presence of these species, because it's an indication of what the hydrology is doing at that point and that it's still capable of supporting these species.
Where we disagree, or where you, Dr. Massey, you may part company. You remember when she gave evidence, she talked about the welly boot test and going on site and being able to determine fairly readily whether you are in wet bog or dry bog.
You're still on bog.
Yes, but not necessarily active bog. And as Dr. Massey said in her evidence, and you differ from here, and I respect your view, but she says actually you can tell that if you're an active bog or not because of whether or not it's waterlogged.
Yes, but as I've said, for that to be the case, the water level can be 5 to 10 centimetres below the surface. It still allows you to walk over it. I regularly go to multiple different variations of bog, and I don't wear wellies. I would wear walking boots or whatever. If you're getting into the situation where the water level is getting above your feet, you could well be getting into a different type of habitat. You could be in more of a pool community or a flush. You can still access bogs without what Dr. Massey calls the welly boot test or whatever. I'm not quite sure what she was suggesting. But I think, yes, the fact that these species are present is what the definitions require, and that's what we've based it on. And they require elements of waterlogging, whether that's seasonally or permanently. The fact that they are still there suggests that this habitat is capable of peat formation, and that's what we're looking for.
I now understand the difference between the 2023 and 2026 advice, and I see where we're apart, and I'm not going to draw us further together, so I'll leave that point there. Nevertheless, the template which you use in order to report on proposed developments that might be matters of natural interest, we can find, can't we? I know it's on your Annex 5, but I want to go to document 443. At page 21. we had a discussion about triple SI selection the other day. I understand that you're not using this document in this case for triple SI selection. I understand the difference, but nevertheless, this is the form which you would use for triple SI selection. And perhaps you've already answered this question, but to round things off in this section before we go on to national interest, I would assume that whatever document 443 says in defining priority peatland, that what you're looking for in terms of defining whether or not something is of national interest so as to underpin an objection, you are still looking for active peatland.
Yes, as defined previously.
As defined in 443. Okay, I see where we are. Now let's turn to the issue of national interest. Go to paragraph 56 of your inquiry report. My assessment of impacts in relation to national interest is done using the Scott guidance. Assessment template was completed during the site visit using the grid references for the turbine foundations. And I think that'll do us as a reference. Let's go, shall we, to CD 443 again, leading towards the template. I'm cutting out some questions because we've already done that. No, we can go straight to the template actually. Have that in front of you. Also have your inquiry report at Annex 5 in front of you. There would appear to be a column missing from your Annex 5 template, being the final column and perhaps the denouement of the whole thing, the assessment result. You'll see in the template possible national interest, not national interest, but in your Annex 5 it ends with criterion 3. Now, did you complete the final column when reporting to your board?
I would have made an overall assessment, taking into account everything that's within the document on Annex 5 of my inquiry report.
Did you complete that column?
I would need to refer back to my guidance, my advice to the area, but there will have been a result at the end of it. Whether it was exactly in that location or not, I couldn't say with the information in front of me.
Well, it is important, isn't it? Because that final column has to be completed for each turbine location.
Okay, I could do it now if you want.
No, I don't want you to give evidence in chief all over again. I'm asking you if you did it.
I will have done it. Where it's recorded is maybe a question.
Yeah. Well, we haven't got it in front of us, whatever. It's quite important, isn't it? I mean, this is the conclusion of the document, taking into account criterion 1, if appropriate, criterion 2, if appropriate, and certainly criterion 3. You draw the threads together at the end, national interest or not. That's what the template instructs you to do. But we don't have any evidence from you in this inquiry on the conclusion of that exercise, do we?
Well, I don't make the decision as to whether it's national interest.
That's not what I asked you. We don't have any evidence from you as to your completion of that column, do we?
No.
Right. Now, if we go through the table itself, so I fully understand it. For criterion 1, raised bog, if it's yes, likely national interest, for montane bog, it's possible national interest. So despite what is said in document 443 about avoiding montane bog, it's possible that you could conclude the montane bog was not a matter of national interest, isn't it? That's what the column says.
I guess, yeah, you could.
You seem surprised by my question.
Because it's more than just that column.
I'm looking at this column. It says, yes is good, possible national interest. Therefore, even if the answer was yes, you might conclude it wasn't of national interest. That's my reading of the column. But from what I gather, that's not the approach you take.
Agreed.
Right. If we look at something puzzled me in your, looking at your Annex 5 now. For turbine 7, there is a footnote. The footnote says the site visit information is from not exactly this turbine location, but within 100 metres. Yeah?
I agree.
Why did you not make the same footnote for all the other turbines you didn't visit?
I don't believe I filled in the form for those other turbines that I didn't visit. So there was no need to put a footnote in. An assessment wasn't made.
Hold on. But you have made an assessment under criterion 3 for turbines you did not visit. Blanket bog, support vegetation capable of being peat forming. Yes, for all of them, but you didn't visit all of the turbines. How could you say yes?
From the information provided by the applicant.
But the information provided by the applicant is not that at all. You've seen the ECIA, you've seen Dr. Massey's report. There's a specific disagreement on that very point. You could not conclude yes on the basis of the applicant's information. So how did you conclude yes for the turbine locations you did not visit, even in some cases to within 600 metres? How could you write yes?
So I can write yes because the definition of blanket bog supporting vegetation capable of peat forming, well, I can determine it's blanket bog from the MVC survey. Does it support vegetation capable of peat forming? Well, the vegetation that's capable of peat forming is present within the habitats that are identified as blanket bog. So we're talking about sphagnum species, cotton grasses, heather, all of those. If they were not present, you wouldn't be able to assign the habitat to the blanket bog communities that had been. So that is a starting point for saying that they are present. I don't think that's an unfair assessment.
It's not a starting point, is it? This is your concluding form you present to the board. And for example, for turbine, let's have a look, turbine 6, you went within 100 metres of it. Well, hang on, let's take another one. For turbine 9, you went within only 600 metres of that turbine. And yet, from that distance, you somehow assessed that in that location there is blanket bog vegetation capable of being peat forming. I challenge how you're able to do that.
As I've said before,
Sorry.
it was taken from the information provided by the applicant. They identified this one from this annex as M19A/B. So it'll be in a mosaic of habitats. So that was present. I would like to kind of add to this that we look at a development as a whole, and the information that's provided in our national interest panel doesn't require us to make full assessment of every single bit of infrastructure that's within there. It looks at the information that we have provided and what we have done a full assessment of, and can make a decision, or the director makes a decision with information or advice from the panel. So this is part of the process, and I very clearly haven't gone further with information that would need to be collated from a site visit. I think I've made that quite clear, and I think I've explained why I've said yes by the information that's been provided and from using the definitions that we refer to.
Mm. For turbine 6, just taking this point one stage further, you went to within roughly 100 metres, and yet you complete all the criterion 3 columns for that. On what basis?
You've asked this question before about turbine 6 and where I went. So as I've said, that was in a peak pan, but as I said in response to that, it's not just that precise location, it's looking at the micro siting, the turbine,
Yeah, I heard the answer.
The crane hard standing, so I can make that assessment on the other areas that will be impacted, and I believe that's what I have done in this instance, and from that I could draw these conclusions.
I see why we're apart on that. Okay, leave it there. I had prepared some questions for you on restoration, but given the engagement of this inquiry and in your inquiry report on that issue, I have no questions for you on that topic. And so I have no more questions for you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Trinick. Given the witness has been going for an hour, and I've got some questions and there'll be re-examination, I am going to propose that we stop for lunch. We could make it a shorter lunch if that would suit, but just to be fair to the witness, I think to go for another half an hour, 3/4 an hour without a break wouldn't be probably fair. So I'm going to suggest a lunch break, but I could accept a shorter lunch break if that was in people's interests. Do any parties have any thoughts on that? Mr. Trinick?
Happy with a short lunch.
Short lunch? 30 minutes, okay?
How many, sorry?
30 minutes?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. Happy to come back at 12:30?
Yep.
12:30? And that will allow the witness a reasonable break. Okay, thank you.
Where are sandwiches? Outside? Sunny? Fine.
Okay, that's half past now, and earlier Mr. Trinick completed the cross-examination on behalf of the applicant, and now it's my turn, Mr. Toole, to ask some questions. I've got maybe 4 or 5 questions to ask. So, the first, a similar question to that I asked Dr. Massey, and I don't think we need to go to the documents, but unless you want to, starting with the NatureScot guidance, the 2026 version, I asked a question around the purpose of the guidance, and it's clearly stated at the start of the guidance what the purpose is. And in paraphrasing that, it's to provide internal, guidance to NatureScot's staff on responses on peatland matters. Does the guidance do anything other than that? Does it have a wider application other than informing NatureScot's staff in terms of how to conduct assessments and making conclusions?
I would agree that its principal use is for that. The fact that we publish it means that it can be used by others, the public or developers, and we do see that it is taken into consideration in some developments in terms of design or restoration plans and all of that. So in that context, it is taken kind of beyond just NatureScot at that point.
And following on from that, then, although the purpose is clearly stated, based on your experience, has it affected, for want of a better phrase, development management or application decisions? Has it, for example, the matter we've been discussing, the Montane bog matter and the discussion around 600 metres, in your experience, has that influenced decisions? Because that's where it appears in the guidance. So I'm just trying to get to the bottom of whether the guidance which is produced for a clear purpose is also influencing decisions.
I would have thought it is taken into account in decision making, much as kind of a lot of our guidance is. We provide advice to the consenting body, and they take that advice on board with the applicant's advice. And I guess by having this document published, they are very clear about how we've come to our response, and so it in that respect it is kind of indirectly influencing potentially decisions, but how the decisions are finally made would be beyond what I could comment on, but certainly it's referenced in our consultation responses, and it's often mentioned in applicants' submissions as well. So it has been used as a kind of core document for some of these processes.
There are a number of decisions, I think some appeal decisions, some ECU decisions and such like that are submitted as part of the evidence. Are any of those influenced by the guidance from your recollection? I've not looked through them all, if I'm being honest, but if there are any of the decisions that are in front of me that have been influenced by the Montane bog definition, it'd be useful to hear. As far as you're aware.
Yeah, I missed the very beginning of your question. Is it the documents submitted for this development? For this
inquiry. There have been a number of appeal and other ECU decisions and ministers' decisions submitted as part of the core documents.
I can't say I've read every single one of them, but I do know that it has been used by NatureScot for this development and by the applicant in this development. I haven't looked through all of the decision making. I believe the council are of a similar opinion from with us as to where the development sits, and that has used our guidance to inform that, as well as our consultation response but to the exact detail I don't have to hand.
Does that, I think you mentioned it earlier on in giving answers that there was previous reference in SPP, I think you did say that, and in the 23 guidance as well, I think. But currently, leaving aside those historic documents, does that definition of a montane bog and the guidance to avoid areas above 600 metres. Does that exist anywhere else in other guidance, to your knowledge, based on your experience? Either in guidance, good practice, or policy in Scotland?
So I mainly comment on peatland, and that would be how we make decisions on that. Going beyond that is kind of, would be a different person's expertise, but we use it for montane bog, and that's where I sit. Whether others would use it for other habitats, we would need to look at that separately.
But as far as you're aware, it doesn't exist in any other guidance either Nature Scott have produced or planning policy that's used to make conclusions of develop or to come to conclusions on applications. It's the 2026 guidance that it appears in.
Yes, I would agree to that.
Yeah.
And the policies refer to relevant guidance, and that this would be the guidance that would kind of allude to. And
I think the parties have had the opportunity to make those comments in the further written submissions on policy matters. So, and I've seen the initial submissions on that, so that's useful. Again, a similar question that I asked Dr. Massey. We've had significant discussions around normally peat forming, but I did ask also whether there was any guidance or anything available on what a significant area might be, because that's another part of the definitions, either Annex 1 or the JCC definitions. But to your knowledge, is there any additional guidance on what a significant area might be?
So most of the definitions around active are used for development. It's not often used in other peatland ecology situations, and I have acknowledged that there's a gap in information in this, and that's why there's that commissioned report that was mentioned earlier today. If you give me 1 second, I will find its reference. And that has provided some context for how you could go about assessing significant impact. Now, that was published, I think, in May this year, but that does provide some of that information. And the steer from that is, it would be looking at the mesotope, which would in effect be the hydrological unit in which that peatland occurs. So it's not at that kind of narrow level, it's within the peat body in which it's located. If you give me 1 second, I will find this reference. Oh, it's 928 is the research report that I'm referencing.
Well, there's no generally accepted guidance amongst practitioners about what a significant area would be. I think that was Dr. Massey's answer, was that there isn't any sort of specific guidance around what a significant area would be measured by.
Yeah, no, that's true. There isn't guidance, and that's why this research report was commissioned, to try and fill that gap.
And again, a similar question to that I've asked Dr. Massey. And I think you've been taken there today in your evidence with regard to the IAR Chapter 6 on ecology. I don't think we need to go to the document. I think it's 1011. But we were taken to table 610, or I was taken to table 610 yesterday by Dr. Massey. She indicated that that's where I would see the conclusion on on the discussion on sensitivity. Today, I think you said that you were confused, or there's a potential for being confused about how matters to do with sensitivity have been concluded in the EIAR in answers to some of Mr. Trinick's questions. But where would you be pointing the reporter to see the see the assessment made on the matter of sensitivity, leaving aside magnitude and the final conclusion? Is it your assessment that, or not your assessment, but is it your view that it is table 610 that I should be looking at?
Yes, from the information that's been provided, the best place would be table 610.
Okay, these questions are in no particular order, but we'll take you to recognition now. I might just go there. Paragraph 18, and this is simply just to clarify matters. The second line, you've said there, well, first and second line, the EAR calculated approximately 26.75 of priority peatland habitat would be lost. Now, you're not saying that the EIAR identifies 26.75 priority peatland habitat. You're saying that's your assessment, or are you saying that the EIAR says that somewhere, uses the terms priority peatland habitat lost?
I could say with confidence that the EIAR has detailed the 26.75 hectares.
Yes, I'm happy with that. It's the
whether or not it's priority peatland, I would need to go back and have a look, but it's certainly peatland, and using the definitions in MPF 4, I think we're agreed it met that criteria. But in terms of what the EIA states, I would need to double check on that point.
I just haven't found it in the EIR, and I can't say I have read it twice or 3 times, but I just wanted to be sure that maybe that was your assessment, because obviously there is differences of definition between peatland, between priority peatland, and between priority peatland habitat. So I was just wanting to be clear. I can certainly double check the priority peatland habitat mentions in the EIAR, but unless you had it to hand, unless you knew where it said that, then I've heard the evidence from the other parties. So that.
So in the EIAR document, page 47, electronic page 49, has paragraphs 6.4.3, which talks about habitat loss, and that mentions blanket bog and dry and wet modified bog, and there are some totals in there. So I think it would be fair to say that it doesn't say priority peatland habitat.
So in terms of that paragraph 18, would you be keen to substitute that priority peatland habitat with blanket bog?
There's one other document I would like to check before I confirm that, if that would be okay, and that would be the statement of agreed matters.
Okay.
But I could well agree that, but if I could find that, I'll look on.
And this question is not leading anywhere else. It's just a point of clarification.
Yes, I can confirm that the documentation submitted by the applicant talks about blanket bog or peatland habitat. It doesn't say priority peatland habitat.
thank you for that, and thank you for taking the time to kind of look that out for me. So you'd be quite happy to substitute that with peatland habitat rather than priority, in terms of what the EIAR has identified?
I would, yes.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Mr. Trinick took you to other decisions with regard to Cloich and Dell. These are in front of me. Mr. Trinick, you're chatting away there. Ministers will, that information will be in front of them. They may well ask, questions about within their own minds about the story there. Things have obviously moved on from Dell 1, which is over 10 years ago, and your advice provided to Cloich in 2022. Has the tweaks and the changes to the guidance, has that influenced Nature Scott's approach and in arriving at the current situation? Has the picture changed in terms of what advice you're providing to ministers over that period? People looking in may see similar projects in similar locations and just wonder what's moved in terms of the thinking and the guidance. So perhaps you could kind of tell the story for me on that.
So the publication of this guidance in previous forms won't have changed our approach between Cloich and Dell 2. We would have come to the same conclusions for both. The reason there's a difference is because we do look at different proposals on a site-by-site basis and assess them on their merits. And I did mention before, they are different proposals of different scales and on different habitat. And we take all of that into account, and especially with going to our national interest panel and decisions being made there. And our ultimate response is made by directors at that point. So it's the same process, and it's looking at the information that's been provided and our guidance, and then a conclusion is drawn from that point.
And from Dell 1, where according to the decision letter, peatland impact wasn't even a major consideration in that application, which is the same site. So I'm assuming the story has changed since 2012, because the 2023 guidance wasn't sort of in place then. So I'm assuming since Dell 1 the story has changed significantly.
Yes, I would agree with that. We're under different planning policy. We're now under National Planning Framework 4. Also, Scottish Government have recognised the importance of peatland habitat in terms of the nature and climate crises, and has put significant funding behind the restoration of peatland, acknowledging that it has a vital role to play. And as such, MPF 4 has taken some of that into account in terms of biodiversity in policy 3. So yes, the position has changed around peatland, and the understanding of its value has changed in that time. And to reflect that, this is why we have this guidance in this form that that Nature Scott use. So yes, I would say it's fair to say that the situation is different now than it was for Dell 1.
Thank you for that. I think that's actually all the questions I have for you, Mr. Rintoul. Mr. Ferguson, do you need a short break to upload anything, or are you happy to go straight into re-examination of your witness? Yep. Okay, Mr. Ferguson.
Mr. Trenick asked you about your experience in undertaking ECIAs, and you fairly acknowledged you haven't done so. Could you explain briefly your experience in interpreting and working with ECIAs?
Yes, I very regularly review ECIAs for peatland purposes, for considering development proposals on peatland. I've been doing this for a number of years, and over that time have looked at a significant number of them, and so I'm well experienced in seeing different individuals preparing these reports and the conclusions that have been drawn. So I have seen a variety of different ones. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Trenick took you to document 731, and this was, I think it was a compilation of scientific studies referred to by Dr. Mills, and the questions were around whether altitude was specifically referenced. Could you look please at page 14? It's the PDF, page 14. And under...
Sorry, can I stop you there? What was the document reference? Did you say 730?
731.
Sorry, thank you.
Page 14 of the PDF. There are numerous paragraph numbers down the left-hand side which are endlessly confusing, but it's under the subheading 2.1.1 frost action. Could you read, please, the first 5-6 lines and comment whether there is anything in there which is of significance in relation to altitude?
Frost weathering resulting from freezing and thawing of water between peat particles is common in cool, high latitude or high altitude climates which support many peatlands and plays a vital role in breaking the peat surface during winter months.
And is that a relevant factor for Dell 2 and indeed other sites at high altitude?
I would say it would, yes.
Okay, thank you. If you could turn please to document 111, this is the chapter 6 EIA, and it's paragraph 6.4.8, which you were taken to before.
Sorry, what paragraph again? I didn't quite hear that.
It's
Sorry.
paragraph 6.4.8, and it's on page
Okay, got
52.
that.
And this gets back to the issue of importance and national, regional, and so on. So the final, I think it's the final sentence, refers to the restoration proposals facilitating the reversal of the erosion process to active bog. So I think it's clear that the author of the report treated the bog as inactive for these purposes in reaching the regional conclusion. Is that fair?
Yes.
And if the reporter or Scottish ministers were to reach a different conclusion on active, inactive, would that be a relevant consideration for the purposes of determining importance?
I would have thought it would be, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Trinick asked questions and expressed some surprise about the lack of questions put to Dr. Mills in relation to the restoration plan. Could you turn please to Nature Scott's initial consultation response, which I think is document 2.11. And on page 2, there is a section which deals with the OHRMP. So this is an acknowledgement by Nature Scott as to the quality and content of the report. Is it therefore any surprise that Nature Scott did not challenge or question Dr. Mills on his report?
No, and I would have thought it would be wrong too, with that couple of paragraphs.
Thank you. Now, there was some back and forth regarding the requirement for ground truthing, and Mr. Trinick restated the question, and I noted two specific elements of that. Is ground truthing required in relation to NVC classification?
Yes.
And is it required in relation to identification of individual species?
Absolutely.
Is it relevant to the assessment or the appraisal undertaken by Nature Scott in accordance with the guidance?
Ground truthing? Yes. It is very relevant. A number of the criteria, you need to be on site to be able to make that determination for some of them.
But you explained that you hadn't visited all turbines, and you explained that nevertheless the appraisal was undertaken in accordance with the guidance. Could you further elaborate on that, please? Yeah,
so as I said before, some of it can be done in advance with the information that the applicant has provided, but other elements would need some. So it's not solely one or the other, and that's something. Some of it can be done, and some of it does need to be looked at.
Thank you. There was a comment, perhaps it was a throwaway comment, when talking about the welly boots test and whether the absence or presence of water and the requirements for wellies or otherwise is relevant. So is whatever is found tomorrow, given the season we're in, how relevant is that to making an assessment of the condition status of the blanket bog for these purposes?
In the season that we're in now, even with today's weather, I would expect the area to be drier. We've had a number of wildfire warnings for these areas, and that is dictated by a number of climatic factors and using satellite imagery and other sources to determine that actually during these months these areas have been in areas that are dry. But as I've said before, the waterlogging is important in a peatland. It doesn't have to be permanently, it can be seasonally. And during these kind of extreme weather events that we've been seeing a lot of, I would expect the water level to be lower than you might see at other times of year. And as I said, what is classed as active blanket bog by many would be having that water level at 5 to 10 centimetres below the surface vegetation. So it's not an absolute. There are variations within what could be described as active.
Thank you. And could you turn, please, to document 776? Could you explain, please, what this document is? This was part of the bundle of documents obtained by the applicants under FOI and submitted. Can you explain what this note is, who drafted the note, and its purpose?
The email on page 1.
Sorry, it's at page 39 of that bundle.
Oh, yes, I recognise this document. This is my, hang on, I'll just scroll down through it to double check. Yeah, this is my advice note to area staff, providing the peatland advice for this case, for them to take on board on producing the kind of final consultation response.
And this is the document Mr. Trinnig referred to, and we said that we would identify the document number for that.
It is indeed, yes.
Okay. And Mr. Trinnig pointed out that the table, it's Annex 5 in your inquiry report. It's also on page 45 of document 776.
It is, yes.
Mr. Trinnig pointed out that the final column, which deals with the overall assessment, was missing, and indeed it's missing in this version of the document. In what format is this template normally used?
It's very often used as a printed document in the field and then translated into electronic form.
Do you have any thoughts on how the column came to be missing?
Yeah, I would imagine I took it out so that table would fit on a page.
Okay, if
I missed that.
I'm fairly certain I removed that column so this whole table could fit on a page and be seen.
if you scroll back to page 41, which is the last page of your note, and the subheading is Impacts of National Interest. Would this section here, particularly paragraph 13, what does that say in relation to the overall assessment of national interest? And I will acknowledge this overall assessment doesn't cover turbine by turbine. It's an overall assessment.
Yeah, I would say it's a kind of summary of the template table in which we're acknowledging whether or not where the development raises impacts of national interest.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. We've probably reached the end of the taking of the oral evidence in this inquiry session. On the matter of closing submissions on this matter, we would normally seek to send out a summary of case template, yet another template to fill in, and your submissions on this matter. And for just now, we'll just discuss the inquiry topic in those closing submissions. And I'm going to suggest that closing submissions are the dates for those are left until the conditions session, because it may well be that at the end of the conditions session we may allow some broader closing submissions, perhaps in policy matters and such like. So if parties are happy at the moment to leave those dates for closing submissions on this particular topic, on this inquiry session, open at the moment, and we can conclude those after the conditions hearing. But I'd welcome parties' comments on that. Mr. Trinick, you're just about to put your finger on the button.
I'm perfectly happy with that. The only point, I'm not sure, suggestion, thought I had was we've got August the 14th or some date like that for responses to further written submissions on policy. Could we not incorporate that into closing submissions rather than go through a further FWS round?
Mr. Ferguson, do you have any thoughts on that? I think we've had the initial submissions on policy from all parties, I think, on the questions that we had.
Yes, we would be happy to roll the second round of further written submissions into the closing submissions process. I was going to seek extension to the provisional timetable for closing submissions due to unavailability of key team members, but this kills two birds with the one stone.
Do you have any objection, if you like, to setting those dates after the conditions hearing, or would you like to set those dates just now?
Happy with later.
Happy with later.
It may well be that we have some email correspondence to discuss draft dates in advance, just so we have that. But it may well be that they're agreed at the condition, finally agreed, if you like, at the conditions hearing. Okay, thank you very much for that.
So there is one related point to closing submissions, and it's a request of the applicants. It was explained yesterday the applicants are preparing a transcript of the evidence sessions. It would certainly be helpful to me and the team to be working from the same transcript. So that's a request.
I think that's a matter between the two of you. Otherwise, it will be available on YouTube as of tonight, I'm sure.
I can't bear to watch myself on YouTube, so a transcript is better.
I do plan to discuss the site visit tomorrow, but my proposal would be that we'd close those oral proceedings and then have a discussion about the site visit once we've closed these proceedings, because there might be lots of toing and froing, perhaps discussing wellies or boots or otherwise. So many thanks for all of you who have participated in this session. I think we've just agreed that the next oral set, well, we haven't agreed, it is on the 20th of August. There is a requirement to conclude the conditions statement by the 7th of August. So just a gentle reminder for that, for all parties to make sure that's agreed as far as it can be by the 7th of August. I'd like to thank all those at the Wellside Centre for providing a really useful and good facility for our 2 days. It's been a really good venue. So thanks to anyone involved in that. And with that, I'll just close proceedings just now, and in a couple of minutes' time, we'll discuss off camera the site visit arrangements. Thank you.
Thanks.